There's a girl in my grade who cannot stop talking. She's new this year. Don't know where she transferred from. You'd think I've heard by now. Her name is Courtney, and she's got super dark eyes and blonde hair that looks like it's the texture of a horse's tail. She's made friends with this girl Jeannie, who's in my homeroom and is dating my friend Dale. Dale says Jeannie is starting to get kinda sick of Courtney, and I don't really blame her. Thing is, when I say Courtney never stops talking, that only paints half of the picture. You think chatterbox, you think someone who cuts you off, you give Courtney a lot of grace that she doesn't deserve. Courtney never stops talking. We take bio together, and she spends the whole period talking. Even after Miss Richardson tells us to quiet down, while most of us take that as shut up, she takes it as lower my volume, but continue. She doesn't really have anything worthwhile to say, too. It's like, I'll listen to her for 5 minutes, but the minute I tune out, it's like I didn't retain anything. Hearing Courtney go on is kinda like throwing water at a rock. Nothing's gonna soak in.
I can hardly stand it anymore,
Jeannie said to Dale and I one day, dumping her bags down at our table.
I love her, but I can't get a word in edgewise.
Dale cocked his head with a sort of feigned confusion. Who? Courtney? He asked. Gosh, that girl is as quiet as a mouse. Jeannie socked him in the shoulder and collapsed next to him. Dale eyed me and smirked. You know, Levy thinks she's hot. I gagged on my fork and sputtered out bits of hamburger as I laughed. Oh God, I choked. Never. Screw you, man. Never. Wiping my mouth with my sleeve. I thought for a moment. I mean, I'm not gonna lie and say she isn't kinda cute. Jeannie shrugged.
Maybe,
she said,
but only in like a Shelley Duvall kind of way.
I wrinkled my nose. Shelley's got dark hair, I said, and she's way more gentle. Dale shook his head. We're talking teeth, bro, he said. He grinned wide and showing off his braces. Big old chompers. Courtney's a bit horsey in that respect. Jeannie snorted. She looked past me and smiled.
Speak of the devil,
she muttered. She then stood up suddenly, waving her arms.
Courtney! Hey, baby! Come here!
I turned around and sure enough, there was Courtney. She was holding her lunch tray tightly, arms at fixed right angles, glued into her ribs. She had her head down and I could see her muttering, her mouth working quickly to keep up with the words she had already gotten out. She perked up when Jeannie called for her, and she jogged over to our table.
Hey Dale! Hey Levy! Hey Jeannie! Hey guys!
She said in a rush. Everything she was saying was spilling out of her mouth. Word vomit that she was getting out of the way so she could upchuck some more.
You know the cafeteria is crowded, real crowded, real crowded. I almost didn't find you guys. Good thing I am.
She continued stammering while looking between us three, apologizing with her eyes that she couldn't find real words to fit into this conversation. Jeannie took her stuttering as an opportunity to actually talk to her.
You're going to Eddie Carter's party tomorrow night, right?
Jeannie asked. Courtney blinked.
Eddie Carter? Oh, I know Eddie Carter. I have math with Eddie Carter. Eddie Carter, Carter.
Her brow furrowed. I had never really been this up and close to one of Courtney's famed conversations, and I was now able to actually pick up on how she talked. It wasn't that she was always talking or always conversing. She was always making noise. She was always verbalizing. She couldn't let any moment fill with silence, so she stammered until she was able to actually bring words into fruition. That was how someone like Jeannie could talk to her. Jeannie would leap at a moment where she was repeating or vocalizing like a mathematician would snatch an opportunity to round up a repeating decimal.
Eddie Carter, take it, he'll let me in? Never been to a party before, never been to one of his. Take it, I can get in? Could I wonder.
Yeah, I blurted out. She looked to me, stuttering softly. Yeah, Eddie's a good dude. He'll let anyone in. He cares more about the turnout than who actually shows up. Courtney's eyes brightened and she sat down next to me.
That's silly,
she said.
That's silly. You think he'd rather have people he knows at a party? That's the point of parties, huh? The point is to gather people you like and people you know, not just whoever, huh?
She turned to Jeannie and they talked for a bit. I looked over at Dale, who rolled his eyes in a "I wish we hadn't decided to sit here" sort of way. I looked back at Courtney, who was eating now, but still talking. It wasn't as gross as how some other people eat with their mouth open. Since she was talking so fast, putting a fry in her mouth was like watching somebody shove a 2x4 in a wood chipper. Still, it was a weird thing to watch. Every now and then she would close her mouth and around her food and stop talking for a second or so. I had barely any time to notice, but every time she did that, her eyes would get glassy and her cheeks would swell up a little bit. It was like she had gone without breathing. Jeannie was right. She did look a little bit like Shelley Duvall. Jeannie promised Courtney a ride from me to the party on my behalf, much to my chagrin. She sent me Courtney's number so we could figure out all the details together. Surprisingly, Courtney wasn't a super verbal texter. She would send back little phrases like yeah and no thanks. It was a lot more pleasant than talking to her in person. On the day of the party, I had planned to confirm times with her in bio, but she never came to class. I decided to just text her instead. "Hey, I'm gonna pick you up at 7. That okay with you?"
Yeah. Please help me.
I was caught pretty off guard at that. "What do you mean? With what?"
Please help me. I want to stop, but I can't. Just do whatever you can. Please, I want to stop so bad.
Stop what? What do you want me to do?
I just want you to stop it. Do whatever you can. I don't want it anymore. I never did.
Never wanted to... What? I can help you. I just need to know what I'm helping you with. She didn't respond after that. I decided against showing the text to Jeannie and Dale. What could they do? I had no idea what Courtney wanted. How could they? At this point, all I wanted to do was get Courtney in and out of the party. I wasn't concerned about anything before that. Dale gave me his Funky Love Songs CD, something that I didn't necessarily want, but my other CD was the soundtrack to the movie Congo, so I really didn't have a choice. Again, I didn't have a thing for Courtney, but I was less annoyed by her as I had been. I was interested in her, not in that way, more in a scientific way. She lived on the farther side of town, the side where most houses were uninhabited or broken down. It was a rural area, with plenty of big open land spaced out for every towering white house. Her house didn't look too different from any of the other ones, maybe a bit smaller. Vines crawled up every surface and the windows were shut. I could hear sticks and twigs breaking under my tires once I pulled into the drive. After 10 minutes with no response from the text I sent her, I decided to try and step in the house. I left the car running with my music playing at a low volume. Then I got out of the car and peeked into the garage through the little windows they had set up. No cars, no signs of living, just dusty boxes and light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, tied to one another through thick cobwebs. I sidestepped over to the door. Before I could even knock, the door opened in front of me. I stumbled back, grabbing onto the slippery wooden threshold and looking into my eyes at the woman who had opened the door. She had moosey hair that tangled increasingly the longer it went. Her fringe was sparse across her forehead, strands clumped together through the dry sweat that most likely made her hair brittle. Her skin looked like it had been the texture of poultry, greasy, open pores that gave both a slick and leathery appearance at the same time. The bags on her eyes folded into themselves, darkened from years of sleeplessness. Her mouth was stretched thin across her face, giving no appearance of lips, as if she had tucked the skin under her teeth. I could really only focus on her eyes, lidded and dark, screaming exhaustion. I started to open my mouth to say hi, but she pressed a thin finger to my mouth and narrowed her eyes. I got the message. She let her arm fall and let me into the house. I looked past her to see a man sitting at the table. His arms were folded over his head and his eyes bored into the wall. He had the same tired expression as her, frustrated and helpless. They couldn't be Courtney's parents. No, they couldn't. They're both so old and decrepit looking. The woman then tapped me on the shoulder and held out a sticky note that read, "My daughter is upstairs." It was only then that I noticed the noise coming from this place. It was this piercing, droning screeching that was echoing throughout the whole house. It was bouncing off the walls, filling my head and making a chill run down my spine. It was like a pipe had burst and wasn't going to run out of air anytime soon. The man's hands were tense against his head. The woman nodded to the level above us. I'm sure the stairs creaked under me as I went upstairs. I'm sure the floors did too. Thing is, I couldn't make out any of it. This wasn't buzzing. This wasn't humming. I can only describe it as pure, sheer, piercing volume. Nothing like I had heard before. I wanted to put my hands up to my ears, but I knew it wouldn't work. Courtney was sitting on a couch, her back to me, leaning against the wall. Part of me wanted to call out to her, but I remembered her mom putting her finger to my lips. Something told me that I shouldn't say anything in this house. Instead, I walked up to her and softly put a hand on her shoulder. She turned around swiftly, her mouth agape. I could practically see into the back of her throat. Her eyes were wide and worried, pleading and terrified. It was then that I realized that the noise was coming from her. She was screaming. Never winded, never breathless. Just a long string of volume. Her mouth stretched wider across her face, the skin on either side threatening to split. The pitch got higher. I was looking to the windows now, checking for cracks in the glass. Courtney clutched my arms together, digging her nails into my skin and raising her volume once again. I looked at her. Tears were falling down her cheeks and flecking out into my face from the air expelled from her open mouth. Her brow was knotted in intense fear. Her face was close to mine now. Heat radiated from her. Her nails broke my skin and I could feel blood beat up under my shirt. She then thrust me away from her, looked to the ceiling, and finished her scream in a crescendo of ear-splitting pitch. The windows burst, shards and shrapnel flying opposite of us. She brought her volume back down into a low stammer. I was left shaking, arms bloodied and bruised as she smiled at me. We could hear Chaka Khan from my car outside.
Gosh, I'm sorry, I got carried away, I'm sorry.
It's fine?
Awful sorry, gosh.
Courtney was tapping lightly on the bruising on my arms. Deep red freckles surrounded the marks from where the capillaries had burst under my arms. I was thoroughly shaken from my visit to Courtney's house, feeling light and dizzy in a way that was much worse than it sounded. Courtney had been nothing but hospital, apologizing but not explaining what in the hell just happened.
Hey, you'll help me out, right?
She asked.
You'll help me, like I asked, huh? You'll help?
I glanced over at her and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Again, I said. I don't know what you mean by that. Courtney released her grip on my arm and let her hands fall.
I just want to stop,
she said.
I need to, I don't know how, but I need to, I need.
Stop what? I asked. Stop like an addiction? Drugs or something? She growled frustratedly. I drummed my fingers. You know, I hate to be rude, but like, you talk a lot. Is that what you... Oh. There was a house on the street that I could hear, even with my windows closed. Cars were parked all along the curb, kids sitting out on the lawn and laughing. I made a sharp right in what I assumed was Eddie's driveway. I could hear music blaring from the windows. Cool, we're here. Courtney nodded and made several little noises of affirmation, twirling her hair. As we both stepped out, I set my arm on the roof of the car and looked over to her. You gonna be okay tonight? I asked. She looked back up at me, still mumbling to herself. She fidgeted with her hands and shook her head.
I don't know,
she said.
It's hard, it's kind of like tough to say for sure.
Her heels clicked as she walked away in front of me. I followed after, rubbing the tender spot on my arm. A couple in the midst of making out burst through the door, leaving it open for the two of us to walk through. Courtney's eyes widened as she looked inside the house. High ceilings and tall mahogany staircase were waiting in front of us as we stepped through the threshold. I could feel the floor move from under me through the pulsing music. Courtney slunk over to me and dug her nails into my arm. I winced.
I can't hear myself,
she yelled to me over the noise. I nodded.
It's really weird, I don't like it.
I ran my tongue over my teeth. Basement's probably better, I shouted.
What? I can't hear you.
Basement's... I rolled my eyes and pushed her to people and away, leading her to the door to the basement. She was vocalizing loudly behind me. Downstairs was a little better. We could hear the upstairs noise through the walls, but we could barely make it out. It was just pulsating beats and chatter that lended itself to white noise. Courtney quieted down a bit.
That's good, this is nice,
she said. She released her grip a little bit.
Okay, I can hear now, okay, this is good.
There was still panic in her voice. Once we reached the basement, I took a second to look her over while she examined her surroundings. Her breaths were short between her words. I could see her chest rise and fall rapidly. She spoke with a sort of urgency you can really only attribute to anxiety, those quick phrases that come out more for a sake of reassurance than actual substance. Of course, it's tough to link Courtney's conversations with any sort of substance, but this was different. Her usual stream of words came out relaxed, like a river. Now it was rushing out of her mouth like rapids, with rocks in a way that she needed to move quickly as not to stumble over. She really wanted help, I could tell that much, but I couldn't tell with what. Dale and Jeannie were already downstairs, along with a handful of other kids. Some I recognized, some I didn't. They were all sitting on this huge gray sectional. Jeannie was practically in Dale's lap. She caught my eye and waved us over. Dale saw me, saw Courtney clutching my arm, and raised his eyebrows. I shook my head. He shrugged his shoulders and smirked.
Hey, Levy,
Jeannie said.
Hey, Courtney, baby.
The other kids looked up and greeted us, holding up their various solo cups. Courtney and I walked over waving at people. Courtney gripped my arm tighter. Dude, we're hella bored, Dale said. We've played about 6 rounds of Never Have I Ever. It's getting kind of lame. Jeannie snorted.
Kind of, she repeated. I never want to play again. It's all we know, though.
I shrugged. I don't really know what people do at parties, I said. We could probably just hang and...
What are the odds? What are the odds?
Courtney blurted out. We all looked at her in silence as she repeated herself. I couldn't help but flinch as she dug into my bruise.
What are the odds is, it's super fun, like really, really fun game.
Some kid, I think Michael Howe, snapped his fingers. Oh man, yeah, he said. Yo, I played that at Eddie's last party. It's actually super fun. It's that one where
1 to 25.
1 to 25, right? Dale asked. Michael shrugged. I usually do 1 to 10, but it's whatever, he said. Just match numbers and it's cool. Jeannie bit her tongue and tapped her fingers on Dale's chest. I've never played, she whispered. Dale waved his hands. It's easy enough, he said. You'll catch on. We can do a test run with, He scanned the room. I knew the tone in Dale's voice. He knew exactly who he was going to choose. His eyes landed on me and Courtney. We can start with Levy and Courtney. He shot that devilish smile at me that I was learning to hate. Courtney leaned up and cupped her hand between her mouth and my ear.
Just say 10, okay?
She whispered.
Just say 10, please, just 10. You can help me out, I'll tell you. It's just hard. Please say 10.
She took away her hand and leaned back down. Dale smiled at us. Okay, he started. He clasped his hands together. What are the odds that Levy and Courtney will go to that closet? He pointed behind him to an open, empty closet door. For 8 minutes, no questions asked. The other kids laughed and jeered at us. The kid who was probably named Michael sighed. Not usually how it's played, but okay, he said under his breath. Count of 3, you 2, Dale said. Courtney turned to me, once again pleading with her eyes. Everyone counted down for us. 10, I shouted.
10,
Courtney shouted. All of the kids hollered as Courtney immediately yanked my arm and dragged me to the closet. She was breathing heavily and clutching onto her face. It sounded like she was whimpering. Courtney slammed the door behind us. I could make out her hands flailing as she tried to catch her breath.
I'm really scared,
she gasped out.
I'm so scared. I want to stop. I don't know how to stop it. I can't.
I flipped on the light switch. Her face had blanched completely and broken out in a sweat. She was hyperventilating now. Her back to the wall, she clutched to her hair. What do you want to stop? I asked. I racked my brains. What? Stop talking? She yelped.
Yes,
she cried out.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yes, I need to stop talking. I think that's to do with my house. We moved in a few years back, and and the moment I stepped in, it was like I couldn't stop talking. It was like vomit. It just had to come out. I needed to stop talk. I needed to talk. Like I needed to breathe. Levy, I can't control it, and whenever I stop, it's like my heart is going to stop, or I'm gonna dry heave, or my arms are gonna fly off, and
she flailed her hands around.
It's gotten worse lately. That screaming, the screaming I was doing at home earlier, I can't stop that either. It comes out of nowhere when I'm home. And it's happening all the time now. It's like a tornado coming out of my throat and my lungs feel like they're bleeding. I know my mouth can't do that. It shouldn't do that.
Tears are pouring down her face.
My parents haven't said a word this whole time. I don't know if it's because they're scared or maybe they just physically can't speak. But they're so tired. I try to say a word to them now and they just vomit. I try to say a word to them now and it's just vomit. That's what it feels like.
She clutched her stomach and paled.
It's literally word vomit that just it totally expels out of my face. It makes me sweat and feel cold. I feel like I'm always have a fever. No one can help me.
She kneeled forward and started crying and choked, hiccuping sobs.
I hate it. I feel so sick all the time. I want help. I want my mom to nurse me back like when I was a kid, you know? It's so scary. I hate it.
She collapsed against the wall and howled through her sobs.
I want my mommy, Levy. I'm going to die. I just want to die.
She was screaming. God, could no one hear her? I kneeled down and fiddled with my hands. I groaned. I don't know what I can do, Courtney. What do you want me to do? How can I quiet you down? She took deep breaths in an attempt to gather herself. Do you want me to, cover your mouth? Will that do anything? She grasped at my hands and made desperate noises of affirmation.
Yes, please,
she said.
Just try anything, please, anything.
She clasped my hands tightly. I nodded. She released one of my hands and placed it against her mouth, making sure to leave space for her nose. I could still feel air escaping through spaces between my fingertips, so I clamped my other hand over them. Courtney's face grew red, her cheeks swelled, and I could hear noise from the back of her throat. Her eyes were welling up and spilling over. I could feel her cheeks, they were tough. She looked kind of like this lady from that one movie Eraserhead, except more distressed and scared. The noise from the back of her throat grew louder. She slapped at my wrist and I released my hands.
The blood in my ears is gonna spill and it's gonna kill me and I'm gonna die,
she spit out. As she continued to talk, more tears fell once she came to the realization that it didn't work. She leaned forward and punched weakly at my chest, yelling through her crying. I kept on thinking, how can you shut someone up? How can you make someone stop vomiting? How much time do we have left? I stopped. Time. In the closet. Courtney, oh my God, I shouted. She looked up shocked. Courtney, can I kiss you? She blinked.
Levy, I don't think it's the best time, she said.
Given She gestured vaguely at herself. I shook my head. No, it's like I gave a sharp exhale. Okay, it's like when people kiss, it kind of closes their throats. Courtney cocked her head.
Have you ever kissed a human person before?
She asked. I ignored her question. You're really focused on, lip contact, I said. It's a double effort from both sides. Me closing off your mouth is like making a dam, but kissing would be like two rivers kind of converging. She thought for a second, tittering under her breath.
Okay, well,
she said.
Okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense or make sense, but we should try.
She nodded. Yeah,
okay, it's worth a shot, we should try.
We sat cross-legged on the floor and looked at one another. She sang a song from a car's CD quietly under her breath, which made me smile a little bit. She looked like a mess. Her tears were dry, sweat was still dripping over her eyebrows, the rims of her eyes were red and swollen. It was so weird to think about. I had only had my first real conversation with her the day before. Bizarre. I put my hands on her shoulders, noticing once again the bruising and scabs on my arms. I ignored it and looked at her. Her mouth was still moving, muttering, this had to work. We pressed our lips together. It was very firm, that's all I could say about it. Very firm and determined. Nothing like those kisses from the movies. Heat radiated from her face as it had about 1 hour before. Not from embarrassment, I could tell she was trying to force back any noise that was trying to get out. I could hear it faintly, the kind of guttural noise that screamed frustration and anxiety. It wasn't as strong as it was during the whole hand clamp attempt, though. She was really trying, shoving down that word vomit. We kissed to the point where we were both furiously breathing through our noses, like someone trying to drink soda through a coffee straw. We separated and stared at each other. She pursed her lips and looked at me, breathing at a steady pace. Her lips parted and she raised her eyebrows. I smiled. So? I said. I meant to say more, but it was like all of the breath had escaped me. I coughed a little bit. She smiled.
It.
She said in a quiet tone. The same thing happened to her. Like she meant to say more but was caught off by some invisible force. Worked? I finished her sentence for her with a slight flourish of my hand. Again, I meant to go on, but I physically couldn't. I tried to say more, but hot air just came out. I shook my head. She paled. She started. She pointed to me. Think? I continued.
We
Can?
only
Talk?
in.
I paused. My shoulders slumped down. Turns. I fell back into the wall. I stared up at the light bulb as we sat in silence for a second. Was this any better? How could I talk to my parents? How could I talk to Dale? I felt exasperated and hopeless. That kind of feeling where it's like your heart drops to the pit of your stomach and the ground underneath your feet sways. There was nothing I could do now. I'm sure Courtney felt great. She could breathe now. She could let her voice relax and actually have time to think without expelling those thoughts out. This was probably the best she had felt in a while.
But
Courtney said. I looked at her. She was smiling, though her shoulders were tense. She looked relieved to be breathing at a normal pace, letting moments fill with pauses. You're? I said, smiling half-heartedly at her. She gestured to herself and grinned.
better?
She said. She shrugged. We chuckled. Then that grew into laughter. We were both in hysterics, crying, laughing in our delirium. Thankfully, we didn't have to do that in turn. She sighed and curled up on the cramped floor of the closet.
Thanks,
she said. I gave a thumbs up. God, she looked like she was about to fall asleep. So much exhaustion finally lifted off of her. No more vomit.